Hi, everybody. My name is Ruth Rumack, and thank you for joining us tonight for Raising a Reader. I'm very excited to be able to bring this webinar to you. It is definitely a passion of mine, early and emergent readers and working with readers who are struggling throughout the ages and the years and the grades. And this tonight is really a culmination of lots and lots of years of experience and lots of practice and really working with kids who needed a way to access learning and figuring out a way to make it fun for everybody. So that's what I'm hoping to share this evening. And hi, Laura. Nice to see you there. I'm watching the attendee list and we are waiting. We've got a nice crowd expected tonight. So we're going to give it a few minutes and see what happens. Let's see what I can, let's have a little conversation. Since Laura, you're the first one in, you get the prize. Laura, maybe in the chat, if you wish, you can put in the ages of the kids that you're thinking of tonight, if they're your own children, or if you're an educator and you're working with a group of kids, let me know. And then we can kind of tailor things to where you're coming from too. Of course, it's just 7 o'clock now. So we're going to give everybody a few minutes just to come in and then we're going to get started. Oh, we've got 2 people in. Leanne is in. Hi, Leanne. Hope you're doing well. I was just saying that since we've got a small crowd to begin with, I would love it if you could put in the chat what the ages of the children that you're thinking of tonight are, whether they're your own children or they're kids that you work with. Love to know more about our participants too. All right, we're going to give everybody 1 more minute and then we're going to get started because I've got a lot to cover tonight, that is for sure. All right, Joelle, do you want to, we can run, oh, Leanne says my child is 9, excellent. So I'm taking from that you are, they may or may not be at that beginning emergent stage. Maybe they're a little bit further along, or maybe they are just coming to put all of the reading pieces together. I know lots of kids who are in grade 2, grade 3 this year, who have been through 2 years of pandemic schooling, who need a boost. They need some skills in order to get up to reading level. Laura says, my kids are 8 and 10. Youngest struggled to learn to decode, and I taught her myself using Teach Yourself to Read in 100 easy lessons during the pandemic. Good for you. That's quite, it's quite a task to take on, you know, especially when you know that your child is struggling and it's difficult to get them to pull the pieces out together and then put them back together. Leanne says my child is a good reader, but says she hates reading. You know what? I have an answer for you that's coming up a little bit later in our lightning round of questions. So hopefully I'll be able to address that as well. Teach your child to read, teach not yourself. Yes, I know the book. I'm very familiar with the book. Great. All right. Well, let's start with our slide presentation, and I'm going to reintroduce myself. Let's see where we're at. Give it a moment. There it is. All right. And I'm going to give me just 1 moment. All right. I would love to welcome you to Raising a Reader. I'm Ruth Rumack. I'm the founder and executive director of education at Ruth Rumack's Learning Space. We are a full-service academic support center. We really believe in active learning, in hands-on approach, multi-sensory, multimodal, and we really like to get kids active and going, getting their enthusiasm and their motivation up so that their confidence and their skills also build. So let's move on. Today we're going to talk about reading. Like, one of the most important things in our life these days is the ability to read. And when we don't have that ability at our fingertips, it can make life very challenging. And it can make academics and school very challenging, because even though reading is its own subject, that act of reading, whether it's a textbook or an article or you know, a text or something sent as a group chat on your phone, These are things that bring us together socially as a culture. And when we don't have those skills, or those skills aren't strong, it can make things really challenging. So if we want to jump back to the beginning, we're going to talk about reading and reading acquisition and how it happens and the parts that you need to have in place in order to be a strong reader. The Big Five. The Big Five, this is from the National Panel of Reading from several years ago, 2000 actually, but they took apart 1,000 different articles, studies, research pieces, and this panel looked for what is it that you actually need to be a successful reader? What does a program need to have in order to get your child or a child from zero reading to at grade level or above? And we look at these big five. The number one thing is phonological awareness. We're going to talk about that in a moment. Then we look at phonics. We're going to talk about that too. Adding in then vocabulary, building your vocabulary. That all culminates in building your fluency. And then, of course, leading to comprehension. So these 5 areas or pieces need to be part of any comprehensive reading program. And these are the pieces that we need in order to be strong readers going forward. All right, let's take a look at the next slide. So let's talk about the first thing, phonological awareness. What is that? Phonological awareness is the ability to hear and manipulate sounds within spoken language or oral language. And it is a skill that develops very early on. Some say it's actually starting to develop when the child is in the womb, if you can believe it, because they can hear sounds of language. And every language has different sets of phonemes or different sounds. So a child, a newborn, is actually totally hyper aware, super absorbent to absorb any of those sounds and then start to communicate using those sounds later on. So the phonological awareness is the ability to recognize those sounds and manipulate those sounds. And when we look at them, we're looking at the whole picture, whether it's word parts like the syllables, the rhymes, words in a sentence, alliteration, or we're looking at the phonemic awareness, which is the ability to understand and isolate small parts, just the individual sounds. So we're going to talk more about this throughout the evening, but it's an understanding of how sounds work in language and how we can manipulate them. Let's look at the next slide. So we talk about phonemes, and phonemes are the smallest units of sound. They are those individual sounds that we will squeeze together when we're talking to make a word, and when we're reading, we'll be able to pull those parts apart and then squeeze them back together to say the word out loud from written or from print. You'll notice here that the phonemes are not necessarily in alphabetical order, and they are also not necessarily just one letter by itself. A phoneme is a sound, and a sound in English, as confusing as it is, can be made up of 1, 2, or even 3 different letters together. So you'll also notice that the way that this is laid out, this phoneme chart, is a high frequency phoneme chart. How many of you have ever watched Wheel of Fortune? Well, Wheel of Fortune is a game where you have to guess the words and you get to choose a letter to see if it pops up in a certain, as many times as it can. And you'll never see somebody start Wheel of Fortune by asking for a letter X, right? Pat, can you tell me if there's a letter X? No, they're going to go with S, T, P, M, R, those high frequency phonemes. So when we teach reading, we want to teach the phonemes in a certain order of high frequency so that a student can start using those phonemes quickly and start putting together sounds and words. All right, let's look at the next one. So phonological awareness, and why is it so important? Well, my goodness, 30 plus years of research tell us that it is one of the best predictors of future reading success, and that it plays a super important role in the acquisition of reading skills and language development. The other thing that's important about it is, or wonderful about it, is that it is a skill and it can be taught. And when students don't have that skill naturally, or sort of at the beginning of their reading journey, we can teach them these phonological awareness skills in order to really strengthen their future reading ability and raise their confidence and success as they go forward. All right, let's keep moving. So I'll tell you, I'm going to venture a little bit off the slide and tell you a little bit about my coming to phonological awareness. So Ruth for Max Learning Space has been in existence for 25 years. And at the very beginning of my career, my practice, I was working with a lot of kids in grade 3, grade 4, grade 5, grade 6, who were really struggling with reading. And it was very difficult for them to read, a paragraph, let alone a story, let alone a chapter book. And being a young teacher, I really didn't have I didn't have at that point as much experience with reading challenges, and I didn't know where to begin. So I just started my own research and I started to dig for answers. What programs could I use? How could I help these kids who really were struggling with their reading and therefore struggling academically? And it was really severely impacting their self-esteem and their confidence. So the more research I did, the more it led me to phonological awareness, and the more it led me to the idea of a reading program that is really strongly rooted in phonological awareness and phonics, as well as the idea of sight words and understanding sight words, and we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. And through that, I thought, well, I'm seeing all of these kids who are, in grade 4, 5, 6 who aren't reading. Wouldn't it be better if I could find these kids, or at least be proactive and find kids at age 4, 5, and 6 who needed to build their phonological awareness skills and give them these skills earlier on so that they wouldn't have to struggle later in life? So the more research I did, I started to compile everything and put together a program called Alpha Mania. And Alpha Mania, it started out as a once-a-week program where kids would come and we would do activities and games and songs and stories, and we would learn the symbols, the letter shapes, the letter names, the letter sounds, and we would also practice these really important phonological awareness skills. And that's what you see on the screen here, which these 5 skills: rhyming, blending, alliteration, segmenting, and then sound manipulation. These work in progression, and each part of phonological awareness builds another part of the brain that helps us with reading later on, but also with language and as I said before, manipulating those sounds within language. So we're going to talk about those coming up next. Now, what did we do with that? Well, I took that program that we developed, or that I developed, and that was a once-a-week program, and we were able to actually put all of our lesson plans together, and then we made it available to daycares. And so now daycares across Canada are using the Alpha Mania program to encourage phonological awareness early on in schooling for nursery school students. And then I thought that's not enough, because there's still a whole bunch of kids that aren't getting these skills and parents don't know about them or how to foster them. So I created a series of books called the Alpha Maniacs. And the Alpha Maniacs are these 5 characters that live in Letter Lagoon. And you may notice that on their letters, on their t-shirts, they have letters, and those letters are their names: Alex, Eddie, Izzy, Ollie, and Umber. And we created this whole world where they could practice, and the students, the kids reading the books with their parents, could practice letter sounds and phonemic and phonological awareness as well. Okay, let's keep looking. So, phonological awareness. The first skill is rhyming. And rhyming has 2 parts. You can learn how to identify a rhyme, and you can learn how to generate your own rhyme. And usually the identifying part comes first, and then the generating part comes second. And some of the things that we want to point out to our kids is, listen to the sounds at the end of these 2 words. Tell me if they sound the same. Rock, lock. And then we can introduce the language. Do they rhyme? If the sounds at the end are the same, then they rhyme. So when we're just identifying, do they rhyme or not, we can play a game with put your thumbs up if they rhyme, put your thumbs down if they don't rhyme. And we can have interaction that way. And then we move on to the next step, which is generating your own rhyme. Can you think of a word that has the same ending sound as cat? Listen, cat. At. Can you think of something else that ends with at? Now, I have to reiterate that these phonological awareness skills are all oral skills. They're skills that we practice in spoken language. We don't write them down. We can show cards and we can, show the words to have a visual representation, but generally these are oral skills that we are developing. And I'll tell you why that's important later on, because we've got the phonological awareness skills that are oral, but the phonics skills are on the written side. Now, parents will often ask me, oh, my kid's making up these crazy words. They're not real words. Does that still count as a rhyme? Yes, absolutely. It counts as a rhyme. And that's important, actually. If your child can play with language and create their own words that fit the pattern, then we know that they're on the right track. If the child is kind of veering towards the same sounds each time to create their rhyme, we want to help them to expand their understanding of rhyming and how that beginning sound changes and how the end sound stays the same. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Here's a game for you. So this is for our younger kids or students who are still struggling with phonemic awareness and phonological awareness. So what can we do? One of the games that we play at Ruth Rumack's Learning Space is the rhyming ball game. Very easy. You need a beach ball or a ball, or sometimes we use a card that we pass back and forth to each other. And basically we say, I hold the ball and I say cat, you say, and then we throw the ball and the child catches the ball and comes up with a word that rhymes with bat. And then we just keep this back and forth, tossing the ball and creating the list of rhyming words. And when we run out of words, that's okay. We just switch the word and start all over again. You can do the same thing by building a tower, everybody putting a block on the tower until the tower falls over or you can't think of any more words. Now, one thing I want to mention, correction. Or what if your kid gets it wrong? What if when you say, can you think of a word that rhymes with cat? And they say car, because they're not thinking about a rhyme, they're thinking about the ending at the beginning, that the beginning is the same. So I don't like to say no. I don't like to say you're wrong. But what I do like to do is model the correct answer. So if the child says, if I say what rhymes with cat and they say car, I say, let's think about that. Listen, cat, at ends with an at. We need something that ends with an at, but car ends with an R sound. So let's think about that again. What about, and then I might give them a suggestion, cat, bat. Can you hear how those two endings are the same? Look at my mouth at the end, cat, bat. They make the same shape. So we want to correct in a way that's not punitive and that doesn't shame them for not knowing the right answer, but does give them a model of what we're looking for. And that goes for all of the parts that we're going to talk about tonight. Okay, let's keep moving. Here's another skill. The next skill is alliteration, which is having several words starting with the same sound. Again, we want our students and our kids to be able to identify that certain words start with the same sound, and we want them to be able to generate a list of words that start with the same sound. So some of the key phrases I might use are, do these words start with the same sound? Pretty obvious. And then back to the shape of your mouth. Does my mouth make the same shape at the beginning of each of these words? Now, of course, we have to recognize the vocabulary of beginning, middle, and end. That's helpful because if a child is confused as to what is the beginning or the start and what is the end, this may be difficult for them to generate on their own. When we're asking a student to generate their own alliteration, we can say, what's another word that begins with the same sound? Or I'm going to make up a silly sentence. Can you add the last word? Brown bears buy, and we can say bananas. All right, let's look at the next one. Here's a game for alliteration. These are games, all of the games I'm going to share with you tonight really should be very little prep or no prep. Or you can use something that you find around the house in your toy box, in your playroom. And they're really great for road trips or when you're in the car or on the bus or wherever you're going, walking down the street. These are games that I've actually played with my own kids and my nieces and nephews, and my daughter who's 12 and her cousin, when we're all in the car together, will still ask for these games that we've played together since the time that they were 2 and 3 years old. So I know that they're old standards, but they're good ones. So here's the game, alliteration trip game. You tell your child that you're going on a trip. and everything that you take on that trip is going to start with the same sound. And they have to, if they're age appropriate and they can figure out the sound on their own, then you start with the list. I'm going to take a car and cash and a candle. They get to sort of figure out, oh, it's a k word, so they've got to add something with that as well. If they can't guess it on their own, then you can help point out what the similarities are. And you can also have it part of a theme. So, you can use this game for alliteration. You can use it for patterning. You can use it for endings, beginning of words. I mean, it's very versatile. In this case, we're showing it for alliteration. And it's also nice to choose the place where you are going in this trip game that also starts with that sound. So if I'm going to the park, I'm going to bring up pineapple and a pen. And of course, remember, the sillier the better. That's always engaging when you use humor. And it doesn't have to be logical. It just has to fit the pattern. You can also play a memory game with it, where each person has to say all the items that have already been listed before they move on to the next one. That's good for memory, good for parents too. Okay, let's look at the next slide. Phonological awareness skill, blending. So blending is this idea of taking individual sounds and squeezing it together. And when we talk about blending, we want to say a word very slowly and then say it fast, or squeeze those parts together. You can often think about an elastic band. So you're pulling that word apart like an elastic band, and then when you let go, that word shrinks back together and you say it fast. So when I give an example of blending to a student and I want them to blend the sounds, I want to be very monotone. I don't want my voice to be too sing-songy, because I just want them to concentrate on the sounds. And I might even show them how many sounds there are. We would say sun, say it fast, sun. So the funny part about this game, or anything with blending, is that often when I tell students to say it fast, their first reaction is to say it louder. And so they get really excited and they'll just shout it out, sun. But we have to remember, it's not just about saying it loud, it's also about saying it fast. So we're taking those individual sounds and squeezing them back together. And because right now, as a phonological awareness skill, this is oral, this is just done out loud, but this skill transfers directly to being able to decode something or to be able to sound a word out, because that's exactly what they're doing in their heads once they understand the symbol and the sound that that symbol makes. So if they see the letters S-U-N and they know the sounds for each of those letters, they're going to say it in their head, sun, and then squeeze that back together to create the full word. So by practicing these skills early, we're setting the stage for faster development in the reading acquisition of the written word. All right, let's look at the next one. Here are some other games. This is a favorite of mine. You can take a bag, paper bag, a mystery bag, you can put it in a hat, you can put it in anything that you can reach your hand into, and you can sing the song, if you're sure you know my word, yell it out. If you're sure you know my word, yell it out. If you're sure you know my word, then tell me what you've heard. If you're sure you know my word, yell it out. And I might reach into my bag and pull out, oh, I don't pull it out yet. First I say it, rock. Then they have to say it fast, and then I pull it out to check. And that idea of pulling something out, that mystery, it always amazes me that no matter how old a child is, they still love the mystery. They want to know, are they right? What's in there? What is in my hand? Are they going to, guess the right thing? And it's very motivating. So I would highly recommend that game. And again, you can put anything in there. Keep things to, depending on the age of your child and where they are developmentally, you might want to start with things that are just, 2 or 3 sounds, and then spread out from there, depending on where they are and what level of skill they need. Okay, let's look at the next one. This next skill is syllabication, or breaking words apart, segmenting. And when we look at words, there are many different ways of breaking them into parts. We can break them into syllables, which is usually a sound that you can puff out in one breath or one clap. Another trick about one syllable is it only has one vowel sound. So each vowel sound and surrounding letter combination is one syllable. So we can look at it, breaking it up into two parts like baseball, rabbit, jumping. Each of those is breaking it up. Some of it is sort of that compound word, so two parts of a word coming together. Some of it is taking two parts and then splitting it right down the middle. Jumping is that base word of jump, and then the suffix of ing. But ultimately, what we want is a child to be able to segment into first syllables, so big parts, and then later on into individual sounds or phonemes, so that they can use that to help them with their spelling later on. So if they can hear all the sounds in a word, like pen, I have to figure out, how am I going to write the word pen? Well, I hear p, n, and I only hear those three sounds. I'm going to figure out the letters that go with those three sounds. So again, these oral and spoken skills are transferred later on to the written reading and then writing by being able to pull those sounds apart and identify them on their own. All right, let's look at the next one. Here are some games, segmenting. So we can take one word and pull it apart. Keep in mind that sometimes the phoneme or the sound is actually two letters, like the word shark. Shark only has three sounds, even though it has five letters. I told you English is very confusing, but this is the way it goes. So we're looking at that SH together, sh sound. That's only one sound. The AR together is called an R-controlled vowel. We have AR, OR, IR, ER. Those are all R-controlled vowels. And that's also one sound. And then we have the last sound of the k, the shark. So when a child pulls it apart, we want to hear them say sh, r, k. It only has three sounds, even though it has more letters than that. Okay, let's look at the next one. Here are some games. So another element of mystery. If you can take a shoebox or a treasure chest or anything that you can hide things in, and we're going to put items inside that are 1, 2, or 3 syllables long. The child then reaches into the treasure chest, pulls out an object, and then claps out the syllables. So I like to do this with objects. Let's say I pull out a pen. It's only got one syllable. So I want to search around, make sure that I've stuffed that treasure chest full of things with a variety of different syllables so that a child can practice. If you're moving forward from syllables and they got their syllables down, then start to work on phonemes and hearing those individual sounds. All right, let's move on. Okay, we're coming to the last part, the fifth element of phonological awareness, which is your sound manipulation. And this is like we're building, right? So we've done rhyming, blending, alliteration, segmenting. Now we're on to sound manipulation, which is really the gymnastics, the mental gymnastics of these phonological awareness skills. And I have to tell you that some of these types of questions are difficult for adults. We have to think about it a little bit before we make our answer. So sound deletion and substitution is about taking one sound away and asking what is left. So if I took the word book and I took away the b, what would be left? Book. If I took the word book and I took away the k, what would be left? B. And then this is the tricky one. If you take away the middle, this is the hardest. What would be left if we took away the sound? So then they have to think, well, beginning was b, middle was then k, k. And if we squeeze the two ends together, we're just left with book, with no vowel sound in the middle. That's like the very last stages. That's well advanced in terms of sound deletion. And sound substitution is where you're asking to take one sound, remove it, and then replace it with another one, like the word hat, take away the h and replace it with r. Notice that I'm not asking you to take away the h and replace it with an r. I'm asking you to take away the sound that it makes and replace it with another sound. So we have to also differentiate between letter names and letter sounds. And when we're talking about phonological awareness, we're really working on letter sounds and not necessarily their names, because the names don't help us make the sounds. Only the sounds help us make the sounds. All right, let's move on. Here's another game. So this is sound deletion. You can gather a whole bunch of characters, animals, stuffies, whatever it is. You can use pictures, put them on a mat, and you're going to say, I'm looking at an zebra. And then the child has to guess or figure out from what's on the table or on the pictures on the mat what animal you're talking about, and also what letter or sound, not letter, name, but sound is missing. So again, as your child gains these skills, you can make the questions harder and harder. And then the best way to know whether they understand what they're doing is to get them to reverse roles and to ask you the questions. So, they should be able to not only remove sounds, put in other sounds, either the beginning, the middle, or the end, but also turn it around and give you the question and have the correct answer at hand as well. All right, what else have we got? Okay, so the big picture, and then I'm going to pause for some questions. Phonological awareness. It should be an early part of a child's life. We really want to start these skills at age 1.5, 2, 3, 4, 5. They do keep developing. We do know that even a child who is 8, 9, 10, or an adult who does not have strong phonological awareness skills can relearn or learn those skills and then advance their reading ability and their fluency. We know that because this is such a good predictor of reading success, that if a younger student has issues with phonological awareness, rhyming or blending or segmenting or manipulating those sounds, any of that can be a good screening tool for later challenges with reading. So if we can do a pre-screening early, and some preschools do it, some kindergarten classes will do a phonological awareness test at the beginning of the year to see what the child knows and doesn't know. And some schools will jump on it and give the students some intervention in order to build their skills up so that they don't lag behind their peers. That's in the best case scenario. If you are finding that your child or somebody that you're working with does not have strong phonological awareness skills by age 5 or 6, that's the time to really start to get some intervention going. And if it's not happening later on, then of course, identify it and move towards some remediation. And then it just encourages a joy of language. I know with my own daughter, we played these games from the time she was about 1.5 years, and she loved them. And now, I don't know whether she became a strong reader, an early strong reader, necessarily because of all the games that we played together earlier on, but I do know that reading did come quickly for her, and that she loves it. She's got, a whole room full of books that she enjoys over and over again. So part of it is, a natural affinity, but also I think starting early and planting the seed and being proactive allows us to really just enjoy the language and enjoy the world of reading sooner. Okay, let's pause. I have a take a moment question, and let's see what we can do here. I would love to know a little bit more about you guys. I know that Leanne and Laura have already told me the ages of your kids, but if you haven't put it in the chat already, I'd love to know, how old are your kids? What what are the things that you're interested in about raising a reader? This first part was really about those early stages, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. But the other question I have for you is, how did you learn to read? Do you remember? Did you learn by sounding the words out, so using phonics, which we're going to talk about next? Or did you learn by memorizing whole words? Or was it a combination? Or maybe you just figured it out and it just sort of happened naturally. You don't even remember how you learned. If you would like, I would love to know a little bit more about how you learned to read and how you came to all of that too. So let's see who's got something for me. Leanne says, I don't remember learning to read. I think it was phonics. So depending on how old you are, I'm almost, well, I'm not going to tell you how old I am. I'm old, and I learned purely by phonics because that's what was in the school system at the time. And we used the Mr. Muggs books, which was a very, very specific scope and sequence of phonics, started at the beginning and moved our way through. And it was throughout the Toronto District School Board and throughout the Ontario School Board, phonics was the way to go for a long time. Then in the 80s, the pendulum swung and we looked at whole language. And whole language was teaching kids to memorize whole words and look at spelling patterns within those words and extrapolate from that to be able to figure out new words. The problem with a purely sight word or well, purely memorization is that it works up to a point, and you can learn and memorize hundreds and hundreds of words and spelling patterns, but there will be a point where you come to a new word that you've never seen before, and it might be grade 5 or grade 6 or grade 10 when you're learning about different countries and maybe, you know, biological terms in science or who knows what, but you don't actually have the skills to break down words into their smaller parts to be able to put them back together. And I've talked to a lot of parents whose children struggle with reading, who said to me, you know, I don't actually know how to break down those words. And when I see an unfamiliar name, or I'm traveling and I have to say, you know, say that the name of the city that I'm in, I really struggle because I don't actually know how to break those words down. So from my perspective, a balance between a phonics approach and a sight word approach, we really have to give the skills for both and build a strong foundation in order to give the skills the advantage. We have to give our kids the advantage of being able to do both, because of course, in English, there are many words you just can't sound out. But on the flip side, if you come up against an unfamiliar word and you don't have phonological or phonics skills to break it down, it's very difficult to figure it out and you just end up guessing. Okay, Cameron says, age 7, grade 2 in French school, and pushes back against reading practice, interested in strategies to keep him engaged. Yep, we're going to talk about that. Cameron says, I'm also old and don't remember how I learned. I was definitely a voracious reader, not a hesitant one. Wonderful. Leanne says, I remember Mr. Muggs. Well, you know, okay, let's take the old word out of it. We're just going to say that we learn to read in a different way than is being taught in the school system right now. And that doesn't have anything to do with age. It could be where you were taught or you know, where you learned to read in the first place and what our kids are experiencing now. Laura says she doesn't recall learning to read. I was learning in the early 80s, so I think it was a mix of whole word and phonics. Remember learning parts of words and spelling rules. Yeah. Leanne says not old, distinguished. Thank you very much. So this is an interesting topic, you know, figuring out how does one learn to read? And of course, it's multi-layered. And that's really what I think you're going to come away with by the end of this evening. Okay, let's go back to our presentation. Before we do though, do we have any questions besides being old and talking about Mr. Muggs? Do we have any particular questions about phonological awareness, its importance, and how to make it relevant? No. Okay, if anything pops up, put it in the chat. Let's go on. Next, we're going to talk about phonics. So here's the next stage. Now that we understand that we have a good understanding of oral language and phonological awareness and manipulating sounds and being able to pinpoint and identify sounds within words, and we start to learn the sound symbol correspondence. So that's looking at the letter S, and knowing that it makes the sound S, or knowing that SH together makes the sound sh. Those parts are the sound symbol correspondence along with phonemic awareness. Once we understand that part, we're getting ready for the phonics and the decoding part of things. And we need to be able to see that written word, pull apart each of the sounds, identify the sounds, and then put them back together. And we call that decoding, where you're pulling all the sounds apart and then putting them back together. All right, let's look at the next one. So when we look at the progression of phonics sounds, there is a sequence that we want to follow. And good reading programs have a strong sequence that they follow, because they know that a student needs to know short vowel sounds first, and then moving on to digraphs, which are those two letters that come together to make one sound, then blends, so taking two letters, consonants, and squeezing them together to make another sound. And then adding the silent E, the dreaded silent E. It's such a tricky one for so many students. So along with the Alpha Mania program that I developed, and then the series of books that teaches families at home to practice phonological awareness, we ventured into creating our own reading series, and that is the Yak Pack. And we have two sets of the Yak Pack. One is phonics set of readers, and the other is sight words set of readers, because as I said, I really believe that they're important and they both have a place in early reading instruction or reading instruction for struggling readers as well. So looking at the progression, we are looking for not only reading patterns, but we're also identifying spelling patterns, which is important too. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So here's an example. This is our book of comics and phonics. And, you know, from my experience as an educator, keeping kids engaged was really important, but also creating something for struggling readers that are a little older that doesn't look babyish. You know, there are lots of books on the market that are great for the 4, 5, and 6-year-olds, but when you get to be 7, 8, and 9, and you're still reading at a pre-kindergarten level, there isn't much out there. So we created our own set of phonics, and they're full of life, they're engaging, they've got great comics, and they are funny, they've got humor, but they're also chock full of activities and the important progression of the different skills from book 1 through to book 4. All right, let's look at the next one. Here's just a quick example. And one of the things that I look for in a reading program is that progression of only short vowel sounds, and then moving on to adding other patterns as we go along. One of the things that I find really challenging with some of the reading systems that are out there is the fact that they're not controlled. And I remember working with a student who was in grade 1 who was really struggling with reading. She did have a diagnosed reading disability even at grade 1. Actually, she was not in grade 1. She was reading at a grade 1 level, but she was in grade 3. And the books that she was reading were pattern books. And she was reading about the polar bears, and polar bears do this and polar bears do this. And the idea of that pattern book was, I guess, to get her to recognize the word polar bear and then to be able to find it in the sentences going forward. The problem with introducing a struggling reader with the word polar bear is that it has so many sound patterns in it, and you're not actually teaching explicitly the sounds of those words. It's just asking you to memorize the word polar bear and then find it throughout the pages. So part of my soapbox, getting on my soapbox, was to create something that had scope and sequence and that was very controlled and that built confidence and built skills as the child went along. And then, of course, in the books, we also throw in some things for comprehension, because we have to know that the child is understanding what they're reading, not just decoding it. And then I put in a few things about phonological awareness, just to make sure that that skill wasn't getting forgotten. But of course, the decodable readers only have words in them with sounds that have been introduced, and they get progressively harder as they go along. I think we have another quick slide of a later book of the silent E book. All right, let's move on. Yep. So you can see that as they go through the books, the text is getting more complicated and the sentences are getting longer. But still, if you follow the progression, the child should be able to read all of those words in the story because they've already been introduced to those rules. All right, let's look at the next one. So here are some phonics activities for you to do at home. Little plastic Easter eggs are our favorite. And at Ruth Rumack's Learning Space, when we were fully in person, and now we're going back in person slowly but surely, which I'm really excited about, you would find these little Easter eggs hidden everywhere in the office. And what we do is we put little pieces of paper or items inside the eggs. We'll hide them, the students will find them, and then we'll open them up and we'll do different activities with them. So if you're just starting at the beginning and you're practicing just individual sounds, maybe the SH sound, you might hide, or different digraph sounds, you might hide these around the house, get the student to collect them, open them up, and then tell you the sound that it makes, and then maybe a word that starts with that sound. The collection of them it's really amazing. Even, like I said, 8 or 9 or 10-year-olds still get excited about finding something and the mystery of opening it up. Another one, we like to stay really active. So hopping on one foot or jumping on a bouncy ball, and you can have your child take one word and tell you each sound for each one bounce. So if it's the word trip, we'll bounce forward for t, I, p. And again, it helps to isolate those sounds, but it also helps to build the decoding and then the squeezing back together of the word. All right, let's look at the next one. Oh, lightning round. Questions. Thank you. Okay. So I will gladly answer some questions in the chat as well. But I have some questions that were sent ahead of time. So thank you to those of you who sent things in ahead of time. And I'm going to try and answer them as quickly as I can. All right. Lightning round questions for raising a reader. Donna asks, how do you know kids are grasping as they read? Well, comprehension questions and check-ins are really, really important. And when we talk about comprehension, we're talking about fact-based questions, which would be your who, your what, when, and your where, who, what, when, and where. Those are very factual. You can find them in the text more easily. Then you want to also ask your deeper level or higher order thinking questions, which would be the whys and the hows. And those comprehension questions get to the bottom of whether a student really understands the context of what they're reading, can make connections, can make inferences, can make predictions. Those are also questions that need to be asked, not just the basic facts. So at the end of a story, the end of a chapter, you want to ask some who, what, when, or where questions, but you also want to ask some why and how questions and get your children to recall parts of the story and then identify with it themselves. How do they interpret what they've read? Okay, Leanne asks, my child's reading skills are fine, but she has ADHD and hates reading despite multiple incentives. We all love incentives. What can I do? So the quick answer to that is ADHD is also an executive functioning skills challenge. And the executive functioning skills, and there are over a dozen different skills involved in executive functions. But part of those that relate to reading would be your ability to sustain attention. Working memory could be weak. Task initiation, so getting started on something, and then task completion, getting through to the end of something, may be challenging for a student with ADHD as well. So all of these things are variables that we have to take into consideration when we're working with students who have ADHD and who may be fine at the decoding part and reading, but they don't love it and they don't want to stick with it because it's not exciting to them. So we have to make it exciting. We have to bring some enthusiasm to it. Find the spark. What is it that person really loves? What are the topics that kid is really interested in? Interestingly, sometimes it's not a novel or a story or a plot-based reading. Sometimes it's facts and things like Guinness Book of World Records, and or we have a series of books called Who Would Win, where it's a battle between a polar bear, I keep using that example, and a lizard. And, they go into battle and who do they think would win? So we have to find something that interests the student. And we also maybe have to give short bursts of reading at time so that they feel accomplished and there maybe is an activity that goes along with the reading, that it's not just sitting and reading. And of course, the environment too, we're going to talk about in the next question. Okay, we can come back to that later too. So Mark asks, how can books compete with devices? Oh man, screens, tablets, TikTok, YouTube, you name it. Well, I think we have to be deliberate. We have to set aside time for reading. In schools, there's something called the DEAR program, DEAR, drop everything and read. And sometimes it's 15 minutes, sometimes it's 20 minutes. I would suggest that you put that into practice in your own home as well. So you have, Sunday afternoon at 1 o'clock, we're all going to sit down and we're going to read. We're going to put our devices away. So that's deliberate. We're going to carve out some time and we're going to sit together. You could all be reading things separately, everybody on their own story. Or what I think is even nicer is to read something as a family. And, in our house, we like Harry Potter. And my older son, he's 29, and my daughter, who's 12, came together. This is their joy. They sit together and read Harry Potter together. So somebody reads it out loud. You could also be following in a book and having it read on an audio through an audio app, but something that that is deliberate, that is purposeful, and that brings everybody together. You could do a family book club and then do, again, an activity at the end of it, or read the book first and then watch the movie, or do an activity that is based on the theme of that particular book. So if you can model good reading behavior, and we can actually be deliberate in putting away the devices for a period of time, I'm hoping that that will help to kind of beat the competition, and that each of them has their own place. But of course, we still want to really encourage reading from the book. All right, last one. Brenda asks, how to encourage a child to sit down and read when they don't want to sit? Well, my short answer to that is they don't have to sit. Reading isn't about sitting in a place and being still necessarily, although of course when you're reading a book it does help. But some kids like to lie under a coffee table and read, or maybe you want to put up a special tent in the corner with blankets and pillows and make it a really comfy spot, and that's your deliberate space to have reading time. And if your kid is just listening to a story but they don't want to sit still, that's okay, because a lot of people learn better when they move. So if they're listening to it on an audio file, or you're doing the reading out loud, it doesn't have to look like perfect quiet time. Although, you know, the quintessential snuggle up and read, everybody's cozy in bed and calm and quiet is lovely, and it's a bonding experience, but you can get just as much pleasure and just as much out of a more active reading experience. The experience is to hear the story, or to be reading the story, and to be engaged in the characters. It doesn't necessarily have to be still. Okay, any other questions for me? You can put it in the chat. And then we're going to go on to our last section. All right, I'll wait. I'll keep checking the chat if anybody has any more questions. Let's go to our last section, which is all about sight words. So we talked about the phonological awareness. We've talked about the phonics and breaking the words down in print and then being able to put them back together. Now we're going to talk about the sight words. And as I mentioned, English is a very complicated language, and it comes from all sorts of different languages smushed together. And therefore we have strange spelling patterns, and we have certain words that we can sound out because they follow the rules, and certain words that don't follow the rules and we cannot sound them out. So we do have to teach explicitly some sight words. And there are many ways. They could be called high frequency words. They could be called sight words. They could be called the Dolch list. They could be called the Fry list. Regardless of what they're called, they all have something in common, which is these are the highest frequency words that we find in English. And we want to teach them in a specific order, again, a scope and a sequence, so that we're building a child's sight vocabulary so that it makes their reading more fluent and it makes it more enjoyable for them and is less taxing because they don't have to sound every word out that they see. So given that, we put all of our brains together and came up with the Yak Pack sight words set of books, which concentrates on the first 100 out of the 250 common sight words that we see. So it's a series of 5 books, and it is important to learn these words by sight. But of course, we don't have to do it just with flashcards, showing that card over and over again and until the kid wants to run away. There are many different ways to do it. So we created stories that we would practice the sight words, but also activities and games that you could play with your kids to reinforce those sight words once they were learned. I would also say, just sort of a suggestion is to not introduce too many sight words at once. Probably 2 at a time, maybe 3 at a time, depending on your child and how quickly they absorb it. And then stay on those few sight words for a while. Could be 3 or 4 days, a week, 2 weeks. It depends on how quickly your child is absorbing it and where they're moving forward and where they're getting stuck. But not only do we want to stick with it and master those words before moving on, we want to make sure that we're reviewing the old words on a regular basis as well. Okay, let's move forward. There's a picture of our 5-book series, And we do that. We're introducing 2 words per story, and then we're reviewing the different words. And you'll see in the next picture, again, that it was really created for interest, and you can move along. Yeah, interest and humor. And we've used something called the Pictograph. So we're introducing the sight words. This is from the very first book and the very first story, where we're only introducing the and all the rest of the pictures are our words are in picture form, so that even a child who doesn't know how to sound out any words but has recognized the and can read the story. And it builds confidence and it builds excitement, and therefore it builds success. And then when we move to the next slide, you'll see that a little later on, we have activities and more reinforcement. But next slide, you'll see that as the books go forward, oh, we're missing one. Okay, I'll just tell you what it looks like. As we move forward in the books, you're using less and less pictures because you have a stronger sight vocabulary. So as they build their vocabulary of sight words, they're able to read more varied and longer sentences as well. Okay, keep moving forward. I'm going to show you some activities. So because we like to keep things active, even in the sight words, we want to do something that is hands-on and that is multimodal and multisensory. So if you introduce a sight word, we can do it with a flashcard, no harm in that. But I would also say you want to take it one step further, take out some Play-Doh or a pipe cleaner or anything that a child can touch and manipulate, and get them to draw out or create the word and the shape of the letters with the Play-Doh. Then you want to get them to trace that with their finger so that they're getting some neural feedback and that the brain is remembering the shapes of those letters and the sequence of those letters. Another game is to do a sight word memory match. We play this all the time with our students. So you've got it's a game of memory. You've got 2 cards of the same word. They go into the playing grid, and then you're flipping over 2 at one time. If you get a match, you read the match. But the tricky thing, or the clever thing about it, is that the student has to read each card no matter what they turn up. So again, it's just practice and reinforcement through game and through fun. And then you can always extend it by asking them to create a sentence using that word. Okay, let's look at the next one. So here are our different series and our different resources. They were all created in-house with our wonderful teachers. And I think you're going to get a link that tells you where to find them on amazon.ca or .com, depending on where you are. But I would love to open this up to you for questions and to tell me more about what you would like to know, because we still have a little bit of time left. And I'd love to answer your questions. Anybody got some questions for me? What have we got? Well, the thing that I love about teaching reading is the excitement and the fact that a student who comes to us as a struggling reader and who may be very resistant and very closed to the idea of reading doesn't, will sit down, arms crossed, nope, not going to do it, not going to do it. Once we start to bring out these activities and we start to break it down into very small pieces for that child, suddenly, like, the veil lifts and the excitement builds. And then from one session to the next, we're starting to see usually the confidence and the attitude change first. That shift happens, and then the learning begins to really take off. And so when we use that systematic approach, we are making sure that we're not forgetting anything, and that we're building from one step to the next. When we talk about older readers, and I know some of you have older kids, 8 and 10 and so on, 9, 8, 9, 10. The love of reading really comes partly from inside, but partly from the environment, and an environment that is rich with books, with text, with, and I don't mean, SMS text, but articles, magazines, and it doesn't have to always be scholarly. Sometimes it can be very silly. Sometimes it can be lowbrow. It doesn't have to all be, super, super intelligent, intellectual, not intelligent. But anything that fosters that moment of connection with a text. and connection with the characters and connection with a time and a place, either in our reality or maybe in a fantasy world. It allows our imaginations to really soar. And that's what we love. I mean, as a book lover, it's really wonderful to see my kid pick up a book and read it for their own pleasure. And she goes in waves too. You know, sometimes she'll be really into a series and she'll gobble all up, and then she'll leave it for a couple of months and not be reading anything. And then she'll find something else that interests her. I think finding the things that interest your children is number one, and exposing them to different genres is another suggestion that I have. And finding the time to read together is really important, and to share stories and to share those moments of what you liked. Do a family book club, do a family book review, where you each even read your own book and then share what you liked about it and, you know, what the most interesting part was. All right, Laura, somebody has a question. Let's see. How important is it for kids to read chapter books? My child only reads graphic novels. She's capable of reading chapter books, but she does not want to. So this is a tricky one because, you know, the graphic novels are very easy to consume. They're fast. They move quickly. There isn't a lot of text, but a good graphic novel does have the general elements of a strong story. So it has a plot. It has characters that usually develop. It has some type of conflict. And in fact, a lot of good graphic novels will also have a lot of symbolism and theme built in. So there is something to be said, you know, for reading Little Women. You can say, okay, it's a notch on my belt. I did it. I read Little Women. But do you have to read the original version to gain the same benefits of it? Well, I would look at graphic novels that still have appropriate level text and vocabulary, because some graphic novels are quite rich in their vocabulary, in their story progression, in their character progression. And therefore, she's still getting the same elements of a story that she would if she were reading a novel. Some graphic novels, they're very short sentences with very simple words, and it's more about the graphic part. It's about the storytelling through the pictures, which has its advantages too. If that's all she reads, you know, of course, I want to encourage you to encourage her to find something that is a balance to that. You know, read 3 graphic novels, and then let's try this one, this short chapter book. Maybe it's the overwhelming text that she is finding challenging. And if she is struggling with some ADHD tendencies, perhaps that sustained attention, or that it's just overwhelming for her to see a whole page of text without anything to break it up. So the graphic novel gives her a break from reading the words. She can also interpret from the picture. I would try and find a balance. So I'm not against graphic novels, but I would say if we can give her, you know, a 3-to-1 ratio and introduce something else. So Laura says, try Dragon Master's chapter series. If the child is between 7 and 9, they're remarkably engaging, and every chapter ends on a cliffhanger. Even my 10-year-old can't resist them when my younger one is reading with me. Oh, that's great. That's a good one. You know, as I said, it's an interesting, our world is changing, right? And our attention spans are changing, and our ability to concentrate for long periods of time is changing. And if we look at, you know, how Shakespeare, let's talk about Shakespeare for a second, how Shakespeare was produced back in Shakespeare's times, right? It was a 4 to 5 hour play where, you know, people stood in the theater in the round and were there for 4 to 5 hours. They had very long attention spans, but also the play was done super, super, super fast. So it was, our ears were trained differently. The novels that were written 200 years ago in the language that they used 200 years ago is not as appealing or, you know, as accessible to us now. So does that mean we want to leave all of this in the past? No, because there's room for both of it. But I do think that if we can, again, find that interest, find that hook, and maybe that series, the Dragon Masters, is a good one to start with, something that will sort of be a bridge between the graphic novel and the next more traditional novel might help. I hope that was a long-winded way of saying it's not terrible, but of course we want to introduce her to some other things. Does anybody else have any other questions? Dun, dun, dun. Okay, so just before I leave you, I really appreciate your time. I know it's a Thursday evening, and I'm sure you've got lots of other things that you could be doing. So I appreciate your sticking with us and learning some new things about reading and reading acquisition. I would love it if you could just, before you leave, put into the chat one thing that you took away from tonight, maybe something that you didn't know, something that you found interesting, something that you found valuable. It's always good for us to know, what is of value to our listeners, and we take it very, very seriously. So I would love to hear what you got out of this evening, and I'll stick around for some other further questions too. Comments, questions, suggestions, if you want to share some other suggestions for parents too. Dun, 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 dun. All right. I'll give it one more minute. Oh, we've got one message. I love it when that pops up. Laura says, thanks, took some of the tactile ideas and thinking of ways to up age for my 8-year-old. Thank you. I think a lot of those games, even, it really depends on what you put around it, and but any of those mystery games, I'm telling you, anything that you hide, anything that's active, anything that you're putting things underneath and then flipping them over, will still be relevant to an 8-year-old. It just depends on the words and the skills that you're using to practice, whatever you're using to practice. So don't be afraid. Don't think that they're too juvenile, because I think that you can tweak it a little bit and make it just as exciting for an older student. Rebecca says, so many amazing, engaging games. This is so helpful. Thank you, Rebecca. I'm glad that you joined us tonight. What else have we got? Well, I'm going to stick around for a few more minutes, but again, really appreciate your time. And if there's anything that comes up, any questions that you have, they would be lovely to hear from you. You can reach us at info@ruthrumack.com or through our website, www.ruthrumack.com. And we do have many more and varied webinars that we do on a regular basis, always for free. So tell your friends and come and join us next time. Nice to see you, and have a great evening.